There it is. There it is. Welcome in to the Bear With Us podcast. I'm Jack. He's Frank. The sound you just heard, Frank, why did we play that sound? You know why? Because it's the start of the NFL draft.
Draft season is finally fucking here, Jackie.
We made it. We made it. We made it. We made it. I can't believe it's here. I can't even believe it. It feels like this draft has taken 35 years off my life. And that was even after the Bears had traded out of the number one pick. And we kind of, because now it's just, there's so many options. There's so many moving parts. But we have some other things we got to get to first before we really get into the meat of things in regards to this draft, Frank. And obviously, as Bears fans, we should start nowhere else than the fact that the NFC North quarterback situation has gotten a little bit worse. And for us, that's better. That's good. Aaron Rodgers officially traded to the New York Jets on Monday evening, I believe it was. Frank, I mean, how do you feel? I mean, I don't want to get too much into the compensation angle of, did the Packers get fleeced? Did the Jets was it a good trade, a bad trade? Overall, I think it was a good trade for both sides. How did you feel initially when it's finally over? The Aaron Rodgers era of Packers football is finally over.
To be honest, I was shocked that it didn't happen on draft night, especially because there was a swap involved. I honestly, I was expecting the Jets to just flat out give up their first round pick and not swap. So good on the Packers good on the Jets for not making, letting the Packers have that sort of leverage. Honestly, my only thought, and it was more of a progressing thought that I had, was like, and it's because the conditional pick, it may be another first, or a second, depending on if he retires, or what was it, like play a certain amount of snaps or whatever. There's certain conditions.
65% of the snaps next year will turn into a second round pick into a first round pick.
Yeah. And it just made me wonder, like, for as much as we can get annoyed with Aaron Rodgers with his antics and his certain takes, whether politically or, science wise, he's not a stupid person, right? Like he's just not like a flat out dumb guy. I legitimately do think he sabotaged the Packers on purpose a little bit, bringing up the retirement thing, saying like, I was 90% sure, you know what I mean? Just like lowering his own stock to like shove it to the Packers on his way out of the door. That was my biggest thought. And it was because of the conditional second first, depending on the percentage of snaps. Other than that, I mean, just like we were talking a little bit about it off air, it was never a doubt in my mind that this wasn't going to happen. I know like people were sick of the Aaron Rodgers drama and saga, and I totally get that, but I sincerely mean this. I don't think this was on him at all. This was two front offices trying to figure out what's fair compensation for a 39-year-old quarterback who may retire after this year, who said he was going to retire before some mushroom retreat that he had. You know what I mean? So it was like, it was always going to be a little bit longer. If this was a prime, or this was like a Patrick Mahomes trade, this would have gotten done the second he wanted to be out of the door. You know what I mean? Like, it just is what it is for a guy this age who seemingly is on a little bit of the decline. I mean, what were some of your thoughts? What were your takeaways from the whole situation?
Yeah, it's weird. Like, I feel like it really hasn't sunk in yet until he really is wearing the green and black or green and white, depending on what they decide to wear on their opening day. I'm assuming that the Jets will be in a lot of primetime games this year. I feel like they're going to get the Broncos treatment, whether that's deserved or not. I don't think it's interesting because normally when trades like this happen, when big players get traded or big name guys sign elsewhere, it comes with a lot of expectations. The news is just blown out of the water. This is the best team in the NFL right away, no doubt about it. They're winning the Super Bowl. But it's interesting because I feel like this is one of the first times in a while where that hasn't been the total consensus. And I think what you were kind of talking about in regards to Rodgers and how people perceive him around the league, it's like I'm saying on the fans' perspective, I feel like it's not as, like, you think of the hype that Russell Wilson got last year when he was traded to the Broncos. Remember, like, the Broncos, Super Bowl favorites. That's the best division of football. Absolutely, it's going to be the Broncos and the Chiefs in the AFC, like, no doubt. But now I feel like people are being a little more cautious. about Rodgers because he is a little bit older, had sort of a bad season last year in regards to his standards, of course. I think people are kind of being realistic, but I will say, I think this is the Jets. This is the move they had to make, right? As soon as Derek Carr announced he was going to New Orleans and Jimmy G signed with the Raiders, it was basically you have to get Rodgers because they weren't drafting high enough to get one of the rookie quarterbacks, or one of the top rookie quarterbacks, I should say. But this is a move they had to make. Word of caution to Packers fans. Like I understand the other side of the hill may look enticing. You're finally over with the drama. I've had a lot of Packers friends who've texted me and have said, like, relief, just straight relief. They're happy it's over. They're happy to be done with the guy. But you've had stability at the quarterback position for the last, 20 years. So just be careful. Careful what you're 30, really, if you think about it. Yeah, 30.
Yeah.
So just but I did have someone tell me he's excited to watch a season where their expectations aren't astronomical. Like you're not judging every single game as if it's like a playoff game, which I do understand that side of it.
Yeah. Well, I've also sort of seen the sentiment from some Packers fans that are just like, this makes the regular season not exciting, but like mean more again. Cause like you just, as a Packers fan for the last, especially like
you're
10
just
years
in the playoffs.
Yeah. It's just like, let's just fast forward. And if, hopefully not be disappointed in the NFC Championship game again, or get bounced in the first, like, it's just sort of like, let's just fast forward through this. And now there's almost like a little bit more of an appreciation for the offseason. I will say really quick though, I did say he was on he seems to be on the decline, but I said the same thing prior to him winning back-to-back MVPs. Like he had that down year in, 2018? And I don't discount him for having like a fuck you season. You know what I mean? Like, it just like, I think you worded it very well. He had a down year for him. He didn't have a down year for an NFL quarterback. He had a pretty and above average year, all things considered, but you just know the greatness of him. It would not shock me if he has another MVP level season, hiding up his sleeve as he goes to the Jets.
Especially with the offensive, like this will be his best offense that he's played in since he had, Greg Jennings and Jordy Nelson and all those dudes. Like this will be his, and a lot of it will depend, of course, on how that offense works and the scheme and the play calling and things like that, how they adjust to Rodgers versus how Rodgers is going to, if he's going to be a little bit more willing to sort of, not cave, but like adjust to what the Jets want to do on offense. I'm very curious how that situation plays out because we've seen quarterbacks go to different teams and it just takes a little bit. It takes a couple of years to really kind of adjust to things. They don't really have that kind of time with Aaron Rodgers because you never know what he wants to do moving forward. Like this was a win now move. So hopefully, I think this will answer a lot of questions that when you and I were doing our coaching rankings, go check that video out from this previous offseason. Not previous, during the offseason, I should say, previous couple months. But, when we were ranking Robert Saleh and even Matt LaFleur, it was like, we're not really sure how to rank these two because there's so many questions that have to be answered. Now you can really kind of answer questions for both, right? Packers fans will finally get to see what Matt LaFleur is all about as a head coach. This is his team, right? Moving forward, there's no diva involved. There's nothing to get in his way of running the offense he wants to have it run as. And on the flip side, now Robert Saleh has a quarterback to carry his defense to the next level and carry his offense as well to like uplift that team just overall. So it's a very interesting trade for both sides. Again, I don't think it's a bad trade. Like I wasn't like, whoa, like the Jets only got that, or, only had to give up that, or, the Packers were like, wow, I can't believe they got that return, so it's just weird as like, I texted you and I said, like, at this point, who's the best, like, what is the top 5 quarterbacks in the NFC? Like, it's wild how it's like the balance has just completely shifted to the AFC at this point where there's just, it's ridiculous. They're like arguably one top 10 quarterback in the NFC, like in the NFL is in the NFC.
Jalen Hurts.
Yeah.
He's for sure in there because he's probably in the top 5. You can probably make a case for Dak. I'd have to sit down and at like 9 or 10, right? That's about it, though. Really, I mean, who else? You're not putting Kirk in there, are you?
Well, it's a good tease for you a little bit later on because we're after the draft. Frank and I will be doing our quarterback rankings. We want to see kind of where everybody ends up in the draft, but like NFC is fucking wide open, man. And I was watching some highlights from Jordan Love today because I was like, let me remind myself like what should I be looking for? I mean, it's like 3 minutes because he's barely played as a first round pick. It's wild to me. But anyways, man, Packers. I feel like there's like a split down the middle, and you've kind of seen it in some of our group chats and things like that, where it's like some Packers fans are like, no, I think he's going to be good. Others are like, I don't know. And kind of from watching him, I feel like he just like struggles to get the ball downfield. Like I know a lot of the things is he can't really read a defense all that well, but I see him struggling to really air the ball out. So curious to see how that works in that offense.
Yeah, it's also a thing where like he hasn't gotten many live game reps at the NFL level, so there may still be things where it's like his processor, the things that we touched on with Justin, just like getting better at as he gets real-time reps, and like we've touched on the importance of that. That still may not be right where it is because practice can't really get you to that level. It just is what it is. But in terms of like knowing the playbook and such, they should be able to draw things up. If he's a solid or above average or just anything but bad, or even an average quarterback, they should be able to draw things up that should have success. But I think that's where, as an evaluator, whether a fan like sort of talking about it or like an actual exec in the NFL, particularly the Green Bay front office, like how do you separate like, yeah, he should be at this level because he's been here for 4 years versus like, oh, he's much better than we thought, or like he is as good as we thought, and we should pay him after 1 year of, being the starting quarterback. So it's such a weird position to be in because, to me, unless you have like, I don't know, like you're sort of compared. You have to compare this year at like an elite rookie year, right? Like a Joe Burrow before he got hurt, Patrick Mahomes, Justin Herbert. If you don't have that type of year and you're in position next year to draft a quarterback high, I think you have to pull the trigger on a quarterback, right? Like you don't just throw all your eggs in that basket. Again, unless he has a monster, like undoubtedly, okay, he's the guy. Which again, I'm right there with you. We just have to wait and see. How the hell can you say one way or the other? Like the Bears fan in me wants to say, oh yeah, he sucks, but objectively, we know that he sucks. So I mean, we have no idea if he's good or not. So it's just a wait and see for them. But I mean, this is exactly why we said last year, and we got called all types of names and things. But that's why you should have did this last year. You get a bigger haul for Rodgers last year in the offseason. You probably missed the playoffs anyway, so you get a higher draft pick. You get to really evaluate the kid. But then if he is good enough, or he has like an average season, you have a whole nother year to do that evaluation again. Now you're stuck with just 1 year of evaluation. So they sort of box themselves into a corner trying to squeeze one more year out of Rodgers, and it just didn't work out.
That's why we were pounding the table to just give Mitch as much help as you possibly can to really know if he sucks or not. Like that was the whole thing. So, and then one last thing I wanted to touch on, Frank, because it really just made me think of you. The GM of the Jets was talking about Zach Wilson and how this really impacts him. And the GM was like, I think this is great for Zach Wilson because he's going to really get to sit and learn behind one of the all-time greats. His ceiling is still incredibly high. Like this is like, what do you think is the future of Zach Wilson? Like, is it over for him in New York? Is there any sort of chance this helps his career moving forward?
No, I mean he's done. Again, like I've had people ask me just point blank because if you look on paper, like Justin's numbers aren't crazy impressive the last couple of years, but they're like, well, what looking at their stats, they're similar, they're comparable. Like, what do you see in Justin that you don't see in Zach? And it's just that ability to improve. Look at what from day one of Justin being in the NFL to however many games he started now, he looks. You see the improvement. Forget the stats. Just look at with your own eyes. With Zach Wilson, he's still just as lost. It's that game that who was the Jets quote Sam Darnold had against New England when he's like, I'm just like seeing ghosts. That's what Zach Wilson looks like nonstop. Like, he didn't even have the flashes that Darnold did. Like, Darnold, you can squint and be like, okay, if he puts it together, he has the talent. Zach doesn't have. Again, I didn't like his college tape either, though, so it may sound like I'm being harsh, but, you know, this is what I thought you were getting in Zach Wilson, no matter where you drafted him. So to me, this type of prospect needs to go in the 3rd or 4th round as a developmental guy. You sit for some years, see if we can, you know, develop you, not as the number 2 guy, because you can't. I mean, you're really selling your fan base to that. I know you sort of have to say that he's going to be there unless you just flat out cut him, but, you know, you can't truly believe that, I guess is what I'm saying. Like, to the media, of course, you speak nice of him, but he's cooked. You wouldn't even make this trade if Zach Wilson had any sort of potential to be a starting NFL quarterback. I mean, you're telling on yourself just by making this trade.
Yeah, no, that's exactly why I wanted to ask you about it. I have no other thoughts on it. I just love anytime I can get Frank's thoughts on Zach Wilson, I have to kind of poke the bear a little bit.
But, you know, but again, I know it sounds harsh, but it's like, I mean, it's comparable to there was a big fight this past weekend with Ryan Garcia and Tank, and everyone's like, oh, now that, you know, Ryan lost, everyone's saying he's a hype job, and it's like, I'm raising my hand. Like, I've been saying it for 4 years now. He just finally stepped up to the elite level. And it's like the same thing with Zach Wilson. Like, I'm not doing this because of the Rodgers trade. Like, check my track record. Like, I can screenshot you posts and texts and you know, things in group chats that I said about him. I evaluated his tape, and I'm not acting like I'm the end all be all. I've been wrong about prospects before, but I was right about him. It just is what it is. I'm telling you what I've thought the whole time.
Which makes it even funnier that that it's happening all over again in this draft coming up on Thursday, which we'll get into in a second.
Oh, man, yeah.
Yeah. So Frank and I are definitely going to talk a little more about, you know, about the just the overall draft, because it's one of the best NFL events all season. Is it number 2 behind the Super Bowl?
Jackie, it might be number 1. Can I present the argument as to why it's bigger than the Super Bowl?
Yeah, go for it. So, I'd love to hear the argument.
The Super Bowl is big. We know that. It has the commercials and it attracts sort of the fans that don't necessarily watch football. They're watching it just because it's the event. It's just the NFL has built that product up. But the draft is a time where everyone has faith in their team again. It doesn't really, like, you can maybe have a handful of teams that still feel like, you know what, this year isn't the year. But again, like, even from a Bears fan, that doesn't mean everyone thinks they're going to win the Super Bowl. But you have a really good draft. You knock the first 4 picks out of the ballpark. They're all serviceable starters. A couple are superstars. You can say, look what the Lions did last year. That could be us this year. That could be even better. Even like someone like the Cardinals, if we just stay 500 until Kyler's back. Like, you know what I mean? Like, there's so many teams that can like squint and be like, we get Jalen Carter at 3. You know what I mean? Like that solves a few of the problems. Like, you have so many more teams who are like, this is it. Like, this is what we're 3 draft picks away from sort of upping the floor and being a playoff team. So it might be a bigger event.
I don't hate that argument at all. There is absolutely well-deserved optimism for all of your fan bases, especially if you're a team that, like, you think about it, like teams who were terrible all during the season. It's the first time you get to feel good because your team was so bad. You get one of the best prospects, or you have the opportunity to get one of the best prospects in football, like in college football. And you get to add it. You get some new players on your team. You maybe, you know, had some signings you really liked.
Yep.
Maybe things are starting to look up a little bit. Whereas in the Super Bowl, you're right. Like, it's a very fun event, usually. Well, especially this past Super Bowl was absolutely incredible. But unless you're like a really big fan of one of those 2 teams, you know, most people are kind of like,
yeah,
that was cool.
Or like a really big hater of one of the teams. Like, if the Cowboys were in it, the whole NFC East fan base is going to band together and make it an event, right? You know what I mean? But I mean,
the Cowboys being in a Super Bowl is laughable in of itself. You know, and you can take that to the bank. But no, man. Like, I don't know if I might be, you may have swayed me on that. Like, the draft is just, it's a ton of fun. There's a lot of good things. Like, you know, I think the mock drafts, people who take those seriously are just like hilarious to me. People who get upset about them are even funnier. Like, dude, if you don't want to look at them, don't look at them. It's just people filling up time. It's people having fun. But I will say this draft has taken a few years off my life, Frank, just because of how many different people have been assigned to the Bears. You know, you think of like not even just position, like players, but like players in the positions. Like, there have been 4 different offensive tackles linked to the Bears.
I know.
At the number 9 pick. So it's hard to like keep track of like, okay, who's now the favorite to go to the Bears here? Ian Cunningham, the Bears assistant general manager, was asked a question about a very popular name that's been linked to the Bears, that being Jalen Carter. And basically, Ian Cunningham said, we're going to go best player available regardless. We're going to take best player we think can fit. We're not saying no to any player at this position. And I find that interesting. Again, it's smokescreen season, right? You never know what's real, what's not. Frank, have you been swayed at all? Have there been any changes? Because we've done this a couple times, talked about Jalen Carter quite a bit on this podcast. And I know that you're not the biggest fan of potentially drafting him. Have your opinions changed at all?
Jackie, listen. I've now that draft season is here, or I should say the draft is here. Draft season has been since the day after the Super Bowl. A lot of the podcasts that I listen to are starting to get former GMs, former scouts, just guys who do a lot of scouting and put together these mock drafts. And one of them made a really good point. I wish I remembered his name because I could shout him out. But he was just like, look, we don't have the same ability that people in the front office do. They have red flags on them. That's why they're doing these interviews. That's why they get those top 30 visits and everything. And they were specifically talking about Jalen Carter and the names that he was bringing up. Warren Sapp and Ndamukong Suh. I mean, just the game wreckers on the inside. Aaron Donald, just generational talent. And so what he said was, one, you trust the tape. And he also refuted some of the red flags that were out there about like him taking plays off and things. And he provided context to where some of that came from. One of them, the critique came as, I guess, after he came off of a knee injury. It was his first game back and he looked a little tired. Like, that's to be, that's understandable. That's to be expected. And there was one other time where that critique happened, but it was the first time that he had played like over 85% of the snaps, and it was the fourth quarter. And it was like, well, that everyone does that, like especially a big 330 pounder, whatever the hell he is. So anyway, I say all that to say the biggest point that he made that I thought was a brilliant one was you either trust your front office or you don't. So if you don't trust them and you have these sort of character concerns based on what has happened in this offseason, you're going to say, you know what? I'm still out because I already don't trust my front office. How can I trust them to make sure that the red flags are gone? He can be a good guy for the locker room. And he said, if you trust your front office, they did their due diligence to say, hey, we had these red flags based on our interviews. We think he's mature enough to move forward. We think he's good enough to be a part of this locker room. And I'm here to say, Jack, outside of the Claypool trade, Ryan Poles has done nothing but continue to gain our trust. I wouldn't say the trust is like a 10 out of 10 because it was just 1 year. And this is his second offseason. But we've liked the majority of moves that he's made. He's talked about only wanting high character guys. He continues to do that. He proves that by bringing back Dante Pettis, who by all accounts was great for the locker room. So I would trust him. I really would. And I know I had a pretty harsh take, but it wasn't because of Jalen Carter's talent. Let's make no mistake. He's on a lot of people's boards the number one guy in the draft. That right. If quarterbacks were sort of even keel, like you just put everyone even in terms of impact in the game, he would go number one in this draft. And by some of them, it wouldn't be close by some people's account. So yeah, I would be all in. I think Ian Cunningham and Ryan Poles and probably Eberflus and whoever else is involved in this process, I would assume ownership, based on what happened in the offseason with Jalen Carter, that they gave the green light and said, no, he would be good for us. I still think I hear things in terms of immaturity that I don't necessarily like. The pro day scared me a little, but again, dude, you watch this dude's fucking tape. It's I almost feel like, when they were talking about Zion versus Ja Morant in that debate, and I was just like, maybe Ja winds up, you have the injury concerns with Zion because of his athleticism and that weight that he carries, but like, how can you not take a chance on a guy that big, that athletic, that strong, that everything on a basketball court? And I almost feel the same way about Jalen at this point. It's like how, especially at 9, you're not talking about at 1 anymore. You're not talking about like you have your pick of everyone. You're talking about this guy being available at 9. So
yeah,
I would
Will
be
Anderson
all in
versus Jalen Carter. It's not Yeah, no, I completely understand that point, and I think it makes a lot of sense. I think personally, I still prefer the Bears to go right tackle. I know that Ian Cunningham said that they have about 6 to 8 players they feel comfortable with at number 9, which is great, right? Because obviously there's going to be quarterbacks taken, so a lot of those guys that they're comfortable with will most likely all be there, or not all, but relatively close to 9, if not most of them. Um, you know, Ryan Poles at this point, I just have to assume he knows what he's doing. We did our positional grades the last couple of weeks, and one of the higher grades or one of the better positions we talked about in a brighter light, I'm not going to say necessarily grade wise, was the defensive backs. And those were his first 2 picks. And it wasn't that necessarily we didn't like the players. We like some of the upside on both of the guys that he drafted first. Got him left tackle that he believes can be a starter at the 5th round. Like I'm on board with you. If I were to rate it out of 10, how much I trust Ryan Poles, I think right now it would probably be 7 to 8.
I was going to say 7. Yep.
I can't go super high, right? Because there were some things questionable that he did last year, right? But he didn't really have a whole lot to work with. But that's not an excuse for drafting a guy like Velus Jones in the 3rd round. And that pick just, I don't mean to pick on Velus too much, but the pick just from top to bottom didn't really make a whole lot of sense. Outside of the fact that he was fast, right? Like that was kind of the big reason they drafted him. But outside of that, it just never really added up. But he like you said, Frank, he really hasn't given you a reason to distrust him at this point. Like it's not like the players he drafted last year were absolutely terrible, couldn't play, hurt all the time, out of the just you don't know what you have in them at all. So I agree with you. I think regardless of who gets picked at 9, if anyone gets picked at 9, if they trade back, whenever the Bears make their selection, you just kind of have to sit back and just kind of wait and see what happens. I know it's frustrating to do that because you want immediate validation that your team picked the right player, but you're not going to have that right away. It's not how the NFL works. And you might not even have that for a couple of years to see if this draft class is any good overall.
Well, especially at certain positions, though. And that's why, like, for as harsh as we were, especially on the corner, well, we weren't necessarily harsh on them, but, like, the picks themselves, corner is a position, and safety as well. These secondary positions are tough. Again, right. A guy that, what I think was a glaring example of that was Kyle Fuller. I remember one of the first conversations that we had when we met. I remember it was me, you, and another one of the coworkers there, and the coworker laughed at me for saying I still like Kyle Fuller's potential because he had a couple of down first couple seasons. He's like, oh no, they got to get another corner or at least like put him at safety. And I was like, I like his skill. I think he's gonna develop it, and he wound up being a really good player. And I'm not acting like, oh, I'm right about everything. I've been wrong about players, but like, the corner is one of those positions that you don't give up on. But I say that to say, interior defensive lineman, that's not something that's supposed to, especially in the first round, that's something that has to make an immediate impact, right? Like tackle, these guys are supposed to make an immediate impact. You can have your rookie mistakes, like every position does, but that impact has to be immediate if they go, either trench. Either trench has to make an immediate impact.
Well, and so that's what's interesting to me about Jalen Carter and why I would prefer to go offensive line right now. I know at some point the Bears are going to have to build up their defensive line depth. We've talked about that. That was the lowest grade we gave to any position group when we did it. But, if you're drafting Jalen Carter over, if you go that route, if you go best player available, Jalen Carter, no doubt about it, and he's not able to make an immediate impact. You think of like how guys get double, like Aaron Donald gets triple teamed, double teamed. He's always the focus of the defense. You think about the Bears defensive line right now, that's what's going to happen. He's the premier player. And I'm not saying that you don't draft him because you're scared that he can't make an impact by being the best player. But if you do that in a year where you're trying to establish what you have in Justin Fields, you want to see if he can progress as a quarterback, just passing side, running side, just running an offense overall. and you go a route where you'd prefer to build up the defensive line with the best player, but decide not to get a potential really great right tackle or just left tackle, whatever. I think that's a mistake. That's my opinion. But I would rather, again, we've talked about this 100 times. I would be okay if they drafted Jalen Carter based off the talent. But I'd be lying if I said I wouldn't be disappointed in the sense that I really want them to just build around Justin Fields just to make sure they know what they have when the decision potentially comes up.
I totally agree. No, I'm right there with you. But I think if the premier tackles are gone by 9, let's say Paris Johnson's gone, Skoronski's gone, and and Carter's still there, I would prefer to take him there over someone like Broderick Jones.
Absolutely.
At 9. You get what I'm saying? Like, so we don't know what the rest of the board is looking like. But if let's say Paris Johnson and or Skoronski's there with Jalen Carter, I'm taking the tackle.
Yeah. Okay. I just wanted to double check because that the context is important. Like if it's quarterbacks and corners, right? And Will Anderson is one of the other picks, and all of the tackles are somehow still there, and Jalen Carter, I think you have a very difficult decision in terms of maybe you do trade down. Maybe you play up Jalen Carter a little bit, and you can kind of trade back a little and get some extra picks or things like that. So there's options. Absolutely. Because I know that you created a list of players that you would want the Bears to either target at 9 or possibly trade back. You'd feel comfortable with them taking. Before we really dig into the weeds on that, I do want to talk a little bit about the draft overall, because this is such a fascinating draft. I mean, I can't remember a draft like this in a long time where it's like there's not even really a consensus number 1 pick, except I guess last year, because you had people weren't sure who the Jaguars were going to take number 1. So I guess that, but like just from top to bottom, like there were teams, I feel like in the top 10, like literally every team can go any different route and it would make sense regardless of what they do. It's an insane draft. And one of the big stories coming today is Will Levis is his first round, his odds to be the first overall pick to the Carolina Panthers went from like plus 4,000 to plus 400, like overnight. Frank, are the Panthers really going to draft Will Levis number 1?
I don't think you can. No. I mean, I tweeted today he's Zach Wilson 2.0. I don't feel as strongly. I just meant he honestly, this reminds me more of the Ryan Tannehill draft. You remember him like inching up draft boards closer and closer to the draft, and he wound up going, what was it, like 3rd overall, 4th overall? He went really high. But the thing with Will that's different about Zach is that his tape, like just his physical talents, actually, you see it. Like he has a very strong arm. He looks like a quarterback. He's big. He's broad.
He's Jay Cutler, dude. He's Jay Cutler.
I know, right? And that's what I mean. So I don't feel like the way I talk about Zach Wilson being like a 3rd round pick. I think Will Levis should be picked in the 1st round, like in the teens, early 20s, in that range, as a guy who maybe doesn't start right away, but you can mold him. He has all the tools physically to be like a Josh Allen type, but I think he has to sit. I don't think, or just go on a team that's, just really, really bad, and he just gets to soak up all that experience in year 1. But even then, like that doesn't mean number 2 to the Texans. That doesn't mean number 1 to the Panthers. Like the team, well, if he gets drafted there, he has to be the savior. He needs to go somewhere that doesn't have necessarily the highest. So maybe even someone like Tennessee at 11, or they trade up to 9 with the Bears to get him. That would make sense. You let him sit for a year or 2. He didn't have to be the savior there right away, right? Does that make sense? Like he's more developmental, and I think he has to sit for at least a year. But if he starts year 1, it has to be with a team who maybe he does better than Ryan Tannehill at OTAs. He does better than him in the preseason. And you're like, okay, let's just give it to him now. Expectations are still low. We're getting him experience. Versus like you go to Houston, you better fucking flash right now, or we may draft Caleb Williams right back again next year if we go 1-16. You know what I mean? Like It's just there's a different level of what you need based on the pick, and I just don't. Carolina can't take him again.
Dude,
like
if the Panthers, if they trade up, if they traded up to number 1 to ultimately draft a guy that they probably could have had at 9, that will be the funniest thing of all time. Plus, that's great for the Bears, in my opinion, because I don't see Will Levis having a super great rookie season if he starts right away, like you were saying, which is great for the Bears because they have Carolina's first pick next year, which could be a very, very high pick next year.
So, and you know, the thing is, it's funny. What I was going to say was, what the fuck did we do when the draft was in May? Like, this feels like such a long off season. It had to have felt even longer. Then I don't know if we're podcasting then, but
so I've been thinking about this. I've seen people talking about this, and as Bears fans, one thing to remember is we were very rarely involved in the draft because of just, not having first round picks or just not being really in a position to make a strike at, we had so many other question marks at so many bigger positions than what can Leonard Floyd do or what can Roquan Smith do at this, like I'm being dead serious. Like the draft hasn't been important to Bears fans since that number 3 overall pick in 2017.
Yep. I agree.
And even then, if you remember, the conversation wasn't, oh man, maybe we can get Mitch, or maybe we can get Deshaun Watson, or we can get Patrick Mahomes. It was, can we get Solomon Thomas? Can we get
Jamal
Adams at 3? Like, it wasn't about the quarterbacks. It wasn't.
Yeah, no, you're right.
And
you're 100% right.
Because they just signed Mike Glennon.
Yep.
And so Bears fans were kind of like, okay, well, let's see what we have in Mike Glennon. We not a lot of people probably knew who he was. So it wasn't like, and Patrick Mahomes, as much as people want to say, oh, Bears could have had him, which is very true, but he wasn't a top prospect at that point. He wasn't talked about, and even Deshaun Watson wasn't talked about the way that Deshaun Watson probably should have been talked about, which was very strange, especially when you kind of, it was almost like the 2022 draft where it was like, yeah, we like these quarterbacks, but we don't see any of them as like franchise guys, which is just insane as now. But yeah, the draft hasn't really mattered to Bears fans in quite some time. The way that because as bad as mediocre as they've been, they really haven't drafted super high. Like, first time they've had the first pick, never really had like the second pick or, top 5 picks on and on and on,
Well, and the reason why I even brought that up was, we brought up the Zach Wilson thing, and even like the Mitch thing, if you were on board with that, or just thinking like he got way overdrafted, which a lot of people did. The same way that I'm talking about Zach, a lot of people talked about Mitch going into that draft, and it has to be bad for the NFL, right? When the Jets draft Zach Wilson at 2, because then they build all this talent around them. Like, the NFL doesn't want that, right? You want parity in your league. You want new teams to compete every single year. So I almost wonder if the NFL continues to see people outthink themselves. Because again, the only conversation at 1 should be CJ Stroud and Bryce Young. The buck stops there. Those are the 2 most seasoned players. Their tape looks the best. They have the most experience. There should be no other conversation for the first quarterback. And then whoever drafts the quarterback next, you're drafting the other guy. If I'm the commissioner or the owners or whoever, I'm pushing to move this shit up to the end of March. Because like, you're only giving these guys more time to convince themselves that Zach Wilson's good, that Will Levis could be the guy at number 1 or number 2. And maybe I'm getting ahead of myself, because I don't think he's going number 1, and I don't think he's going number 2 to the Texans either. But even if he goes 4 to the Colts, I just don't. If Stroud is there or Young, depending on who goes number 1, like that, you're taking him over those guys. You know what I mean? It's. We shall see, Jackie. We shall see. Do we want to? Oh, go ahead.
No, I was just gonna say it's still interesting that we're talking about Will Levis potentially going number 1, and the fact that Lamar Jackson is still basically available for anyone who wants him, and no team is going to get him. It's It's fascinating to me. No, before we get into the Bears stuff, last thing really is just, how crazy this draft is going to get after the number 1 overall pick.
Oh, I know.
Because if it's Bryce Young, people are confident that if Bryce Young is available, the Texans will take him at 2. That's kind of been the consensus. It sounds like.
Yep.
If he goes number 1, the Texans could go freaking crazy and draft. I've seen Tyree Wilson going number 2
I have
over
as well.
Will Anderson. And then the Cardinals, there was a lot of rumors this week that Kyler really likes Paris Johnson, and the Cardinals might actually be taking a tackle at 3. And so the Colts then at 4 might have the option of, obviously I think they go quarterback, but they could trade back. Just a team that wants Will Anderson, like Seattle or the Lions or whatever. And they could still get CJ Stroud just by sitting at 4. We were talking about how they needed to trade up to number 1. And it's insane, like how crazy this draft could get very quickly, depending on what happens at number 1.
I agree. And I think there's going to be at least 2 trades within the top 10, not within, but like someone trading into the top 10.
Yeah. I've seen the Titans linked a lot.
Titans, and I think the Steelers are really looking to move up as well, especially if Jalen Carter gets to the Bears pick. The Bears are going to have a look in the mirror.
If Jalen Carter is available at 9 and the Steelers call them 17, hey, we'll give you your pick 31 back and our first round pick next year, and this pick.
I feel like you have to do that, right?
Do it in a fucking heartbeat.
I agree.
I know people are like, oh, that's not going to happen, but because it's basically trading 2 first round picks for pick, but you're going into the top 10. We've seen higher. So
I don't think it would be that. I think it would be a pick swap, like a 3rd this year and a 1st next year.
I don't know. If I'm Poles, I'm saying, hey, listen, I know I can get a 2025 first round pick too. You give me that.
It worked once, so he just continues to do it.
Right. You give me that pick 31 back.
Can you imagine just like
now.
In year 3, he's negotiating with the free agent. Hey, listen, I know I can get a 2025 pick, bud. And the guy's what?
Let me ask you this, and I think I know your answer, but let me ask you this real quick, and then we'll get into the players. If the Steelers called you up and they said, hey, Ryan Poles, we got 2 options for you. Number 1, we'll give you pick number 17, pick 31, and we'll give you a 2024 4th round pick. Or we'll give you pick 17, our 24 first, and our 24 3rd. What would you take? Would you take the 2nd rounder this year, or would you rather have guaranteed a first round pick next year?
I would do the first round pick next year. That gives you 3 first rounders next year. That gives you so much flexibility. Because again, I don't think this is a Super Bowl contender this upcoming year. Even if you knock this draft out of the ballpark, the NFC's weak, so you can sneak in as a wild card or potentially even win the division with like 8 wins. This division may not be very good, but I think you bet on that, because again, then you're talking. Remember, we're talking about the Tyreek Hill trade, the AJ Brown trade. There's a disgruntled player out there. We got 2 firsts for you. And then, hey, we still have another fucking first. That's what I mean. Like, so we shall see. But if they call me and they say Ryan Poles, I'm gonna say, listen, bub, I'm not Ryan, but this is what you should do.
You should give us all of your first round picks, as many first round picks as you can get for this pick. I agree with you. I think I'd rather have the 3 first round picks next year.
Yeah.
We were laughed at, by the way, by certain non-Bears fans. Non-Bears fan entities about how excited we were that the Bears could get T. Higgins before they got DJ Moore. Popping up right now, conversations are literally popping up about where T. Higgins could get traded to. It's like, what the fuck, So.
Listen, you put T. Higgins and DJ Moore in the same wide receiver room. Holy shit, is that a fucking thing of beauty?
And Caleb Williams back there at quarterback.
Okay, let's fucking relax, Jackie. I'm getting sick of this shit.
You put Justin Fields back there at running back in his natural position.
Well, they're getting Bijan at 9, so you're running like 2 tailbacks, 2 tailback system.
Let's talk it through. Let's talk it through the players. There we go. On the clock, Bears number 9, Frankie. You're Ryan Poles. Put your little Ryan Poles sunglasses on. Put the aviators on. Put the big pea coat. pop the collar a little bit, pull into work at 4:56 a.m. There it is. There it is. There it is. Who who are we drafting? Who are we drafting at 9? Give me the list of guys that we can choose from.
Listen, Jackie. So I made 3 categories for staying at 9. The players that I love: Paris Johnson. No particular order. They just play Paris Johnson, Jalen Carter. I threw Will Anderson on there because I saw some things now. What you talked about, Tyree Wilson going 2 and just getting a little crazy. And then Peter Skoronski. Those are the 4 guys we stay at 9. I love those picks. The maybes, and this is with the context: Will Anderson goes 2, Jalen Carter goes 3, Skoronski goes to fucking Seattle, Paris Johnson goes to Atlanta or whoever. My maybes, if that happens: Broderick Jones, Darnell Wright. You stay at 9. I'm okay with that. We need a tackle. I think those 2 are pretty good players. The hates. Now, I have 2 hates that I don't want to draft them even if we trade back. I have 2 hates that would be good if we trade into the teens. The 2 hates that if we trade back, I'd be okay with: Jackson Smith, Najiba, and Bijan Robinson. You trade with the Steelers at 17 or you get further than that, I'm okay with either of those 2 picks. I think that's good value there. The 2 that I want nothing to do with, even though people love them, yada, yada, I don't fucking care about them because of their position: Christian Gonzalez, Devon Witherspoon. Can't do it. We just drafted corners. You let them develop. We figure that out whenever we get there. I'm on board with you. We build around Justin Fields with offensive weapons, and that's why the Jackson and Bijan, if you're in the teens, that's okay. You're still getting explosive weapons for your young ascending quarterback. Those are my list, Jackie. What do you agree with? What would you add to? What would you switch around? Thoughts?
Yeah, so it's tough because I agree with you on the corners. I want nothing to do with corners at 9. I want nothing to do with the defensive back at 9. If that happens, I will be probably the angriest I've been at Ryan Poles since his tenure started. Since last year at this time, when I think literally tomorrow would be the draft. I can't remember. I was on my honeymoon during it. I was drinking a lot of Balams. If you're ever in Mexico at the Riviera Maya, get the Balam. That's pro tip advice moving forward. I'm not gonna lie to you, Frank. I'm kind of falling in love with Darnell Wright a little bit. I talked about it last week when you were telling me that you were upset about the DM situation. The more I thought about it, the more I was kind of like, man, I kind of like a player with an edge, especially on the offensive line. He's huge, man. He's just a big guy.
He is.
Will Anderson. Listen, we had this whole conversation planned before the Bears traded the number 1 pick about if they stay at 1, who do they go with? Who do we want them to go with? Do we want them going Will Anderson, Jalen Carter? We're going to do this whole debate. Didn't obviously happen. But Will Anderson is like the consensus number 1 pick or like top rated defensive player now in totality without the off the field stuff. Darnell Wright shut his ass down in that Tennessee and Alabama game.
Yep.
And it's really hard not to. I know you can't take that all for what it's worth, but it's not like Darnell Wright was just out there dominating against nobodies. He was playing in the SEC and he was didn't allow a sack. Like that's
pretty fucking impressive,
Frank.
Yeah,
I've tried not to get too attached to players this year, but it's not happening. I really want Darnell Wright at 9.
So he would be in your love. You'd push him up from maybe to love.
Put him up in love. I would say even any of those 3. The Broderick Jones, bump him down a little bit. I don't want him at 9. If all 4 of those guys are and he's the number 1 pick, I'll be like a little confused. But I'd be happy with any of the Paris, Skoronski, or Darnell Wright. Trading back, just again getting the skill players a little bit. Not gonna lie, I kind of like the Bijan pick at 17.
Oh, I would love him there. I wouldn't love him anywhere else. If they trade down even with the Titans at 11, I would still hate that pick.
Hate that. Yeah, no, he needs to be like a after 15 pick, and you get some draft capital back, like high draft capital back as well. Because again, it's like the player. You just look at the player, regardless of position, and that player is probably number 1, number 2, number 3 top player in the draft and you're getting him in the late teens, it's hard to beat that value, especially because it's a position of need. You know, we've talked about this. I know people like Khalil Herbert. I know people are crowning him as like the next thing, but it's not for sure. It's not a for sure thing. And you know how I feel about JSN. You know how I feel
let me
about
ask you. Let me ask you, Jackie. Let's just say they trade to 17. Those are both of the best players on the board. JSN, Bijan. Jackie, they call you and they say, Jack, Ryan Poles. Who are you picking? Pick is in.
My next call, they call me. I'm calling Justin Fields via by A. Who you want? Who you want?
But you know he's gonna pick JSN though.
I know. And I can't lie. I where this offense is going and where it's designed to be, I would prefer to have the security blanket of the best rookie wide receiver in the draft, because again, there's still question marks at Chase Claypool and Darnell Mooney. That's huge. So if you can get your Devonta Smith to pair with your AJ Brown, boom, you're gold. But I also don't hate the fact that you'd be getting such a plus at the running back position that you don't have to worry about it. You don't have to use a 3rd or 4th round pick on a running back. You can use that on a wide receiver, or another offensive lineman, or a cornerback, or something like that. So at this point, I'd probably leave Smith-Njigba, but I would be very hard to say no to Bijan. So that's how I answer that. What about you? Flip that. Those two players?
Uh-huh.
Who are you taking?
Oh, I'm taking Bijan.
No, wow, that was fast. Okay.
Yeah, I'm taking. I just.
Well, you don't like Smith-Njigba.
It's not that I don't like him. It's two things. Like if he goes to Green Bay, I think that's a good pick for them. I think he fits for what they have, and I don't think they have as many needs as the Bears do. That's just a random example, but I don't think we have to address receiver until at least the second, because I think there's going to be some decent prospects there, but. I think just with the addition of DJ Moore, we talked about knocking everyone else back down on that. And now you're talking about like Velus as your 4th. I'm comfortable with him being the 4th. Because is Jackson Smith-Njigba going to come in and be the number 2 right away? I don't know if he's better or really any like that different than Darnell Mooney. You know?
Yeah. I mean, I think he's better. I do think
that's
has the potential to be better.
That's just where we just disagree. Like, man, if I thought he was like any of the guys in the last couple of drafts, I would be talking at 9. I would be like, that's
if he was
guy.
Like Waddle, if he was Jalen Waddle.
If he was Jamar Chase, if he was Garrett Wilson, Chris Olave, I don't think he's those guys, man. I think he's a really good player. I don't think he's that. And that's why you're seeing the reports now that like people think that Zay Flowers is the number 1, and people think that so-and-so is the number 1. I've even seen other people talking about Quentin Johnston. Like, I know like there wasn't necessarily a consensus last year, but there was almost like a tier list of like, here's your 5 guys. Everyone else isn't the guy. These are the guy. You know what I mean? Like, you don't even have that this year. And like if Jackson Smith can't separate himself as like the real for sure number 1, it gets me weird. And I told you I don't really like his film as much.
I wish the Bears could have found a way to get Olave in this offense, because it'd be such a good fit right now.
I mean, you may not have needed you may not have needed DJ Moore if you got Olave.
Yeah, that's a good point.
All right, Jackie. Here's the last portion to it. The if we trade to the teams, specifically with the Pittsburgh thing in mind, because that's who that's what the rumors have been. I touched on Jackson Smith and Bijan. They're both there. The other two, which honestly they may not be there because I've seen them mocked higher than that. I don't think they should go higher. Maybe in that range, they should go in this range, not in the top 10. Tyree Wilson and Nolan Smith would be the two. That's given that Broderick Jones is gone already, Darnell Wright and the tackles are gone already. I've ran some mock drafts. I've looked at other people's mock drafts. They seem to be there. The guy that I would hate, there's not much more hate. If like a corner was there, if the guys that we're talking about at 9, if one of them were to slip 17, I wouldn't hate it. At that point, you're like really picking best player available. So I wouldn't hate them there. The guy that I would hate, Jackie, I forgot to write his name down. The pass rusher from, is it Iowa?
Lucas Van Ness.
We can't. I don't care what pick. I don't care if he slips into the second. Because I've seen some edge rushers that people are high on that are going to go in the second. I've seen some tackles that people are high on that may be there in the second or are projected to be there in the second. I don't care if he slips. everything that I've heard and people who evaluate film that know way more than me about defensive ends, he has one move. He's a bull rusher, and they were comparing him to people who made me uncomfortable. Jackie, I clutched my pearls listening to these podcasts. I didn't like it. He's my hate overall in the first round. I would rather draft a corner at 9 than take him anywhere that the Bears trade back. I'm serious.
Wow. Okay.
But what do you think? Tyree Wilson, Nolan Smith, you trade into the teens, solid value?
Yeah, absolutely. I would take either one of those guys. Because, again, it's not that the Bears don't need defensive line help. I just, at number 9, would prefer them to go offensive tackle. So, yeah, but I agree with you about Van Ness. I know there's like draft experts, quote unquote, who really like him. But I just don't. I don't know. I don't see. I know he's like a local. The thing that makes me a little bit nervous, Frank, I'm not going to lie, is that he went to Barrington, and from if we've learned anything about Ryan Poles in this offseason, it's that he loves himself some local boys. He loves those local prospects, and I'm very curious to see. You know what, Frank? I don't want to talk too much about guys that we hate because I want to try and be a little more positive on this podcast.
That'll be the fucking day, Jackie. We just had 50 minutes of shitting on everybody.
You know who I'm curious to kind of hear how you would feel about this, because I feel like it's one of those things that you could either hate or love. Dalton Kincaid at 17. If the Bears went tight end, what would you do?
Oh, at 17. Oh, yeah.
Yeah, at 17. At 17.
Oh, yeah.
9.
The things that I've heard about this tight end class, I would prefer if they go tight end, it'd be in the second, but he would be the one that if they take in the first round, it could be at 9, but if they trade to 17 and then, or even trade into at like 20 or something, absolutely, I'd take him. Because again, you need weapons. He, by all accounts, is the best receiving threat at tight end coming out of this draft. I would be okay with it. Yeah.
We were talking Bijan, we're talking Smith and Njigba, so definitely wanted to bring up the tight end option because obviously that's big.
But my tier, he would be deep group. He would be a priority under if all 3 of those were available that you just named.
Right.
You can't pick him there.
No. But if Bijan goes 10. And Smith and Njigba goes 13 to the Packers. Like, that's who they traded up. If that's who they wanted to swap picks for with the Jets, and Kincaid is available, okay, let me ask you this. If Kincaid is available, but Tyree Wilson is available as well, or Nolan Smith is available, who are you going with at 17? 17, not 9. 17, not 9.
I would go with Tyree. I like his prototype a lot for the Eberflus defense.
I don't think Tyree's gonna make. I don't think he's gonna make it to
he's not. But I don't think
top 10.
I think he is, but I don't think he should. Especially with the way people talk about these corners, I don't hate them as prospects. I hate them for the Bears. Both of those corners should go top 10 based on what everyone's saying about them. So you add that in with probably 4 quarterbacks. That's what makes me think if you pick Tyree with the other tackles on the board, you know what I mean? Maybe a bit of a reach, but every team has different needs, though. That's the only thing, So we're viewing it from a Bears lens. So I may be shifting it a little bit.
And the Bears have every need. They have needs at all. Well, that's all positions.
Jackie, that's what makes it weird. Because, and I know you've said this a couple times, sort of qualifying it, but you're right. Like, that's what makes, if Jalen Carter were there at 9, if Will Anderson were to somehow slip, or if the Bears just get ballsy and say, we want to trade up to 6 because we want Will Anderson. Some crazy land world that happens, but that is the position group that needs the most help right now. So it's hard for me to even be mad if they were to pass up on Skoronski or Johnson at 9 and go Jalen Carter, because that realistically is the worst position group on the Bears. But I align with your philosophy of I'd much rather this year help Justin continue to make progress and get him either a weapon or a tackle. But it's hard to not it's hard to be mad at taking a potential generational talent on the defensive line.
Yeah, and we will see if Ryan Poles agrees with Frank or myself in terms of if he believes in that philosophy as well. Curious to see exactly what he decides to do with his draft pick at number 9. If he trades back, if he sticks up, if he just wants to take best player available, if he wants to get his best positional player available. it's a very interesting draft right now, and I'm just ready for it to be here and for it to be over, because
Same.
I'm tired of talking about mock drafts. I'm tired of talking about, well, the Bears could go literally any position. It's like, how do we have conversations about that where it's like anything could be on the table because there's no consensus? Like like even the top 5, I couldn't bet on the top 5. I wouldn't do it.
And
I have no clue what's going to happen.
Again, even the fact that they're saying Will may slip to 9 is fucking crazy, but it may happen.
There's no way that happens.
Jackie, there's a way.
I'd put money on it that it doesn't happen.
There's a way. I mean, because the guy that we haven't even spoken about at all yet is Anthony Richardson. He may go top 5.
I hope the Vikings trade up for him. Hope the Vikings trade up and get Anthony Richardson.
What if they come knocking at number 9? You know what? You know what attracts me to getting a pick in the 20s? That you're probably going to ask for a player back that's going to be impactful. That was the same reason why they wanted to trade further than number 2 or number 4, because now you can demand a player to make up for draft capital. You know what I mean?
If the Bears can get a right tackle through that sense, and trade back into the 20s and get something there,
that would be. And then maybe you're at like, mid 20s and you get Bijan.
Here's the thing, man. Here's the thing. You know what? I might have to bump my trust level in polls up to an 8. I don't think I gave him enough credit for what he did to Carolina.
I know that.
I don't think we gave him enough. Yeah.
That's what has me at a 7, because the Claypool thing, that was
brought you down a little bit.
And the Velus as the year went on.
Yeah.
But dude, the way he worked that's a different level of savvy. I just started watching Succession. We just finished season 2. Have you ever seen Succession?
Oh yeah.
So the end of season 2, where I'm at right now, don't tell me anything that happens after this, but Kendall asked his dad, well, why wouldn't it have been me, Dad? Be honest with me. He said, you're not a killer. Just not what you are. And then he goes out to that press conference and he fucking kills his dad, Jackie, at the end of season 2. I loved it. That's what Ryan Poles did to Carolina. He was a fucking shark in the pool.
He might be working a master class in this draft
He might
tomorrow.
Jackie,
on Thursday.
Are we going to do an immediate reaction podcast after the pick?
Yes. Yeah.
We have to, right?
Look out for Frank and I to be giving our quick thoughts on the first round. I don't know about the second round, depending, unless something crazy happens. Probably not. But we'll
first
definitely
round,
do a first reaction to an immediate reaction to the first pick whenever that happens. And then we will give our full draft analysis on the next week's podcast.
Yep.
And give our draft grade, which is always spot on, 100% correct.
Yep.
And never ages poorly at all. Draft grades are meant to happen day after the draft.
Yeah.
Don't even wait for the players to take a snap.
If I recall, you said last year that Velus Jones would fumble 2 punts and lose his job. You said that right when the Bears drafted him, live on this podcast. And then I had threw it back. I said, you know what? I think you're right. I can see that. And I said, I think Braxton Jones is your starting left tackle. He doesn't miss a game. And we had, 2 immediate takes right after the draft. So, tune in.
In all seriousness, I wish our listeners, I wish I was, the draft, I wish I could have been part of the conversation in regards to looking at those first picks of the Ryan Poles era last year. Obviously being on my honeymoon and being incredibly drunk in Mexico didn't allow for that. But, I wish our listeners could have just seen the conversation Frank and I were having about missing out on Pickens and Pierce. And
that text exchange, you may have said a slur. You were drunk.
Who am I to argue? No, I definitely did.
Everybody love everybody.
Yeah, exactly. Everybody love everybody. You're goddamn right. Frankie, this has been the Bear With Us podcast. We appreciate you guys listening. We're finally made it to the draft, and we will have plenty more to talk about next week. And again, be on the lookout for that immediate reaction to the Bears and Ryan Poles, his first round pick as the GM of the Bears.
Yep. Later, Jackie. Later, everybody.